Okay, today we're going to talk about translations. This is just a review. A translation is a transformation that moves or slides an image. So we take this one and we just moved it up and to the right. It does not turn it. It does not flip it. And it does not change size or shape. All it's doing is moving. We just put our finger on it, we move it up, and we move it over. And the way that we do this, the operations that we use are addition and subtraction. And this tells you which way to move on the X line. So if it tells you to move 3 to the right, you're moving this way on the X line. Up, down tells you which way to move on the Y line or the Y axis. If it tells you to move right, it's telling you to add. If it's telling you to move left, it's telling you to subtract. If we started right here at 0, 0, and it told us to move right, we'd be going this way, right? And that's the positive side, so they'd be adding. If it told us to go this way, it would be on the negative side, so we would be subtracting. On the Y line, the same thing. If it tells you to go up, then you are adding. If it tells you to go down, you are subtracting. So here you're starting at 0, 0. If you're going up, you're going with the positive numbers, so you would be adding. If you're going down, you're going with the negative numbers, so you would be subtracting. Okay? Let's try a couple. This one tells us we've got these 3 points, and it says translate 2 units down, which we know means subtract, and 4 units to the right, which we know means add. Well, this right here, down, also tells us that it's got to be the Y point, and left, right, the right tells us that that is the X point. And we know that X comes first and Y comes second on every single point, because if you did A, B, C, D, E, F, G's, you'd have W, X, Y, Z at the end of your alphabet, and X always comes before Y, so X always comes before Y, and our points too. So what we like to do is we like to take our points, and we can just do what it tells us to do. So 2 units down, that's subtracting from the Y, so -2 there. And we've got 4 units to the right, which is adding to our X, so +4 there. And then we can get our L prime point by just doing the operation. So 0 plus 4 is 4, and 3 minus 2 is 1. And there's my new point. I do that with all of them. So I can take M, which is 1, 2, and I can add 4, because that's what it told me to do here. And I can do 2 down, subtract 2 from the Y, do my operations. And I've got 1 plus 4 equals 5, and 2 minus 2 equals 0. So there's my new point for M. And then N is 3, 5, and it tells me to do 2 down on the Y, so let's subtract 2 from the Y. And it tells me 4 right from the X, so that's +4 to the X. And that would give me 7, 3 for my new endpoint. Let's do another one. This tells me to do 5 units up. Up is the Y-axis, and it's also positive because we're going up towards the positive numbers. This tells me 3 units to the right. Well, we know that left, right is X. We know that to the right side are positive numbers, so I'm going to be adding there also. So I've got X is -3, -2, Y is -1, 0, and Z is 1, -2. And I know that this one's my X and this is my Y, because X comes before Y in the alphabet, so X comes before Y when we do our points. So it tells me to add 5 to the Y. So I'm going to add 5 to all of my y's. Add 5, add 5. And then it tells me to add 3 to the x. So add 3, add 3, add 3 to all of my x's. So my x prime is going to be negative 3 plus 3, that's 0. And negative 2 plus 5 is going to be a positive 3. And y prime is going to be negative 1 plus 3 will give me positive 2. And 0 plus 5 is 5. And then z prime, I've got 1 plus 3 is 4. And negative 2 plus 5 is going to give me a positive 3. Do another one. This tells me to move 1 unit down. Down we know is the y-axis, and down goes towards the negative numbers. So I'm going to move 1 unit, subtract 1 unit from the y's. This tells me to do 2 units to the right. I know the right is my x, and I also know that to the right is adding, because it's going towards positive numbers, so I'm going to add 2 to the x's. So if my a is 4, negative 2, and b is 2, negative 1, and c is 0, 0, and I'm going to add 2 units to x, so I'm going to add 2 to all of my x's. And I know that the first number in my point is x's because x comes before y. And then I'm going to subtract 1 from my y's. So subtract 1, subtract 1, subtract 1 from all of my y's. I know that comes second because if I sing my ABCs, the y comes after x. So my a prime is going to be 4 plus 2 is 6. And negative 2 and negative 1 is going to be a negative 3. And my b prime is going to be 2 plus 2 is 4, and negative 1 and negative 1 is negative 2. And then c prime, I've got 0 plus 2 is 2, and 0 plus negative 1 is going to be a negative 1. Okay? Now I just got this written a little different. This to me is the easiest way to do it because it just tells you add 2 to your x value and subtract 3 from your y value. So I've got L is 0, 3, and M is 1, 2, and N is 3, 5. And it tells me to add 2 to x, and I know that the first one is my x value because x comes before y in the alphabet. So I can go ahead and add 2 there. And that tells me to subtract 3 from my y values. And I know that the second value is the y value because y comes after x in the alphabet. So I've got L prime, 0 plus 2 is 2, 3 and negative 3 is 0, M prime is 1 plus 2 is 3, and 2 and negative 3 is going to be a negative 1, and N prime is going to be 3 plus 2 is 5, and 5 minus 3 is going to be a positive 2. Okay, let's do another one. This one tells me to subtract 2 from my x value and to add 1 to my y value. So I've got my x value is negative 3, negative 2. My y is negative 1, 0. Z is 1, negative 2. Okay, so it tells me to subtract 2 from my x value. Well, I know that the first value in all of my points is going to be the x. So I'm going to subtract 2 from all of my x values. And I know that because x comes before y in the alphabet. And it tells me to add 1 to y. And I know that my second value in every point is the y value because I know that y comes after x in the alphabet. So for my x point, it's going to be negative 3 and negative 2, which is negative 5. And negative 2 plus 1, which is a negative 1. And I've got y prime, which is negative 1 and a negative 2, which equals negative 3. And 0 plus 1 is 1. And z prime is 1 and negative 2, which gives me a negative 1. And negative 2 and 1 is also a negative 1. So I've got my new points there. Okay? This one only tells me to subtract 4 from x, sorry. So I'm not doing anything to y because it doesn't tell me to do anything to y. It only tells me to do this right here. So I would do nothing to y. Is 2 negative 1. So because it tells me to do nothing to y, I'm just going to put zeros there. Just to remind me, it tells me to do nothing, so I put zeros. And it tells me to subtract 4 from x. So I subtract 4 from my x values. And I know that the first piece of my point is the x because x comes before y. So my a prime is going to be 4 and negative 4, which is 0, and 2 and 0, which is 2. And then my b point is going to be 2 and a negative 4, which is a negative 2, and a negative 1 and a 0, which ends up being the same, negative 1. Okay, and here we have the lazy way, where they just know that you know that that's the x value, and that's the y value, and that that's what you should do to x, and that's what you should do to y. So, if we have our point 0, L is 0, 3, M is 1, 2, and N is 3, 5. It tells me to subtract 2 from x, so I subtract 2 from all of my x values, and I know that the x value is the first because x comes before y in the alphabet, and it tells me to subtract 3 from my y values, and I know that the y is the second number in my point because y comes after x in the alphabet. So 0 and negative 2 gives me negative 2, and 3 and negative 3 gives me a 0 for L prime. M prime gives me a 1 and a negative 2, which is a negative 1, and 2 and negative 3, which is also a negative 1. And then my N prime, I've got 3 and negative 2, which gives me 1, and 5 and negative 3, which gives me 2. And here's my new point. Okay, here I have the same thing. I've got this telling me to do this to x, and that telling me to do that to y, which means telling me to do nothing. So if this point is negative 3, negative 2, and the y point is negative 1, 0, and the z point is 1, negative 2, and it tells me to do positive 3, that's a positive 3, there's no negative sign there, so it's positive. Doing positive 3 to all of my x's. So positive 3, positive 3, positive 3. I know that those are my x values and my points because x comes before y. And I've got 0, I'm doing 0 to all of my y's. So plus 0, plus 0, plus 0 to all of my y's. I know that the second value is y because y comes after x in the alphabet. So x prime is going to be negative 3 plus 3, which is 0, and negative 2 plus 0, which ends up being negative 2. Y prime is going to be negative 1 plus 3, which is a positive 2, and 0 plus 0, which is 0. And then z prime is going to be 1 plus 3, which is 4, and negative 2 plus 0, which is negative 2. Okay, here's our last example for the day. I've got these points. A is 4, negative 2, and B is 2, negative 1, and C is 0, 0. And it tells me to do negative 4 to my x, and it tells me to do negative 1 to y. So I take my negative 4 down here, I subtract 4, subtract 4, subtract 4 to all of my x's. I know that the first value in all points is x because x comes before y in the alphabet. And then it tells me to subtract 1 from my y's. So subtract 1, subtract 1, subtract 1. I know that the second value in all of my points is y because y comes after x in the alphabet. So 4 minus 4 would be 0. And negative 2 and negative 1 is negative 3 for my a prime. B prime is going to give me 2 and negative 4, which gives me negative 2, and negative 1 and negative 1, which gives me negative 2. So negative 2 for B. And then C prime is going to give me 0 and negative 4 is negative 4, and 0, and -1 is -1. If you have any questions about translations, please come to a help session and ask away. Have a great day.